Hello everyone, and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today, we're presenting a unique and intriguing video that explores a hypothetical scenario. What if World War III were to break out between the United States and China, and how it might eventually be resolved? Just to be clear, this is not a prediction of the future or a real-life event. Instead, we are presenting a thought experiment that aims to stimulate discussion and encourage critical thinking about the consequences of escalating tensions, and how the international community might come together to restore peace. Our video will take you through the potential triggers for such a conflict, its global impact, and the process of working towards a resolution. We'll also explore the recovery and rebuilding efforts that would be needed to help restore stability, promote cooperation, and learn from the experiences that led to the conflict in the first place. Join us as we dive into this fascinating and educational exploration of a what-if scenario, and remember, the goal is to spark a conversation about the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual understanding in maintaining peace and stability in our world. Let's get started. As we embark on our exploration of this hypothetical scenario, it's essential to understand the unique nature of a potential war between the United States and China. Given the advanced technological capabilities and reliance on digital systems in today's world, this conflict is likely to be heavily influenced by cyber warfare from the outset. There are several reasons why a war between the US and China would be primarily fought in the cyber domain. 1. Technological superiority. Both the US and China are global leaders in technology and cyber capabilities. They possess advanced skills, resources, and infrastructure to launch sophisticated cyber attacks, defend their own systems, and gain a strategic advantage in the digital realm. 2. Interdependence. The US and China are deeply interconnected through trade, investment, and technology. This interdependence creates numerous points of vulnerability that can be exploited through cyber warfare, allowing both countries to exert pressure on each other. 3. Information warfare. In the modern era, information is a significant asset, and control over the narrative can shape public opinion, influence decisions, and undermine an enemy's capacity to fight. Both the US and China are likely to engage in intense information warfare campaigns, using cyber tools and tactics to disseminate disinformation, manipulate media, and target critical infrastructure. 4. Shielding the populace. The use of cyber warfare allows both superpowers to minimize the direct involvement of their citizens in the conflict, reducing the risk of civilian casualties and potentially mitigating domestic opposition to the war. As we explore this hypothetical scenario, viewers will see how the intersection of cyber warfare, geopolitics, and global interdependence could shape the course of a war between the US and China. Remember, this is a thought experiment that highlights the potential dangers and consequences of escalating tensions, and the vital importance of diplomacy and cooperation in resolving conflicts. The year 2025 has been chosen as a potential starting point for this hypothetical war between the United States and China primarily, due to the intersection of several significant factors. While this timeline is entirely speculative and should not be considered a definitive prediction, it presents an opportunity to explore the potential consequences of escalating tensions between these two global superpowers. Some factors that contribute to the 2025 scenario include: 1. Technological acceleration. By 2025, technology is expected to advance significantly, further integrating digital systems into our daily lives and making cyber warfare an even more crucial component of modern conflict. This acceleration could exacerbate tensions between the US and China, as both nations vie for technological dominance. 2. Geopolitical shifts. Over the next few years, global power dynamics may continue to shift, with the US and China expected to remain the two most influential nations. A combination of economic, political, and military factors could lead to heightened tensions and an increased likelihood of conflict between these two superpowers. 3. Regional disputes. By 2025, existing regional disputes involving the US, China, or both nations may escalate, putting additional pressure on their already strained relationship. For example, the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, or other flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region could contribute to a deterioration of the broader US-China relationship. 4. Domestic politics. In some scenarios, Domestic political developments in either the US or China could lead to an increase in nationalistic sentiment and a willingness to pursue more aggressive policies, potentially resulting in a breakdown of diplomatic relations and the onset of conflict. While these factors contribute to the 2025 scenario, it's essential to reiterate that this timeline is purely speculative and should not be considered a definitive prediction. The goal of this exploration is to encourage critical thinking and discussion about the potential consequences of escalating tensions between the US and China, the role of cyber warfare in modern conflict, and the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding in maintaining peace and stability in our world. Part 1: The Trigger. The year is 2025. The relationship between the United States and China has been increasingly strained due to several factors, setting the stage for a potential conflict. Both nations are growing more wary of each other's intentions as they vie for global dominance in various sectors, including technology, trade, and military capabilities. 1. Territorial disputes in the South China Sea. One of the main points of contention between the US and China is the territorial dispute in the South China Sea. Both nations have significant economic and strategic interests in the region, which is rich in natural resources and serves as a crucial trade route. China has been aggressively asserting its territorial claims, constructing artificial islands and military bases to solidify its influence in the area. The US, concerned about the rise of Chinese power and the potential threat to freedom of navigation in the region, has been challenging China's actions through diplomatic and military means, including freedom of navigation operations to assert the rights of other nations. 2. Cyber espionage. As the US and China compete for global dominance, cyber espionage has become an increasingly important aspect of their rivalry. Both nations are accused of conducting extensive cyber operations against each other, targeted at stealing valuable intel, disrupting infrastructure, and gaining control over critical systems. The US accuses China of being behind a number of high-profile cyber attacks, including the 2015 hack of the Office of Personnel Management (OPM), which resulted in the theft of personal data of millions of US government employees. China, on the other hand, accuses the US of launching cyber attacks against its own critical infrastructure and engaging in a campaign of cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property and commercial secrets. 3. Economic competition. The economic competition between the US and China has further exacerbated tensions between the two nations. China's rapid rise as a global economic power has caused alarm in the US, leading to a sense of economic insecurity and a fear of being surpassed. The US has imposed tariffs on Chinese imports, seeking to level the playing field and protect its own industries. In response, China has retaliated with tariffs on US goods, leading to an escalating trade war that has disrupted global supply chains and slowed economic growth. For the climax, a sophisticated cyber attack. Against this backdrop of growing tensions, the catalyst that ultimately sets off World War III is a highly sophisticated cyber attack orchestrated by a covert Chinese military unit. The attack is designed to be both disruptive and destructive, targeting critical infrastructure across the US, including power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems. The aim of the attack is to create widespread chaos and destruction, while simultaneously undermining the US's ability to mount a rapid and effective response. The attack successfully cripples the power grid in multiple states, plunging millions of people into darkness and chaos. Emergency services are paralyzed, and critical medical facilities lose power, putting lives at risk. The immediate impact of the attack is a humanitarian crisis, with many people stranded without access to essential services. As the true scale of the damage becomes clear, the US government pinpoints the source of the attack to a facility in China. The revelation leads to widespread public outrage, with many Americans demanding a swift and decisive action. Part 2: The escalation. As the world reels from the devastating cyber attack on the US, the escalation of the conflict between the United States and China takes on various forms and renews tensions on the global stage. 1. Economic sanctions and the collapse of global trade. In response to the cyber attack, the United States, supported by its allies Australia and Japan, imposes harsh economic sanctions on China. These sanctions include freezing of Chinese assets, a ban on trade in key industries, and a series of import bans on Chinese goods. The US also pushes for a global embargo on China, urging other countries to cut off trade ties in an effort to isolate the nation economically. The sanctions have a rapid and devastating impact on the global economy. As China is a major player in international trade, the collapse of trade with the US and its allies leads to a domino effect, causing a worldwide economic downturn. Supply chains are disrupted, leading to shortages of goods and a global increase in inflation. Unemployment rates soar, as businesses struggle to remain operational without access to Chinese products and components. 2. Humanitarian crisis and global instability. The aftermath of the cyber attack and the subsequent economic sanctions create a humanitarian crisis in China, as the nation grapples with the loss of trade and the strain on its resources. China's government faces mounting pressure to retaliate against the US and its allies, further escalating the tensions between the nations. As the conflict continues to escalate, the United Nations becomes increasingly divided, with some countries supporting the US-led sanctions, while others call for a more diplomatic approach. This division leads to a breakdown in global governance, with the UN unable to effectively address the growing crisis or mediate between the opposing factions. 3. The involvement of North Korea. In an attempt to divert attention from the cyber attack and provoke further conflict, North Korea begins launching missile attacks on US military bases in the region and South Korea. The moves are designed to draw the US further into the conflict and create a distraction for both China and the US. North Korea also carries out acts of terrorism on US soil in an effort to incite a full-scale military response. These actions trigger a rapid escalation of the conflict, as the US responds with a series of targeted airstrikes on North Korean military infrastructure. The airstrikes, however, are not enough to deter North Korea, leading the US and South Korea to launch a full-scale invasion of the country. 4. The splitting of the international community. The escalation of the conflict between the United States and China leads to a rapid reconfiguration of global alliances, and the involvement of various nations in the war effort. The entanglement of smaller nations and regional powers adds another layer of complexity to the conflict, as countries are forced to make difficult decisions in order to protect their own interests and security. Ultimately, the expanding conflict and the growing list of nations involved serve to highlight the devastating impact of the war on the international community and the fragility of the global order. Splitting of the international community exacerbates the difficulties in finding a diplomatic solution to the conflict. With the United Nations unable to mediate effectively between the opposing factions, regional organizations and groups may step in to try and resolve the crisis or at least minimize its impact on their respective regions. For example, the European Union (EU) could attempt to broker peace talks between the US-led coalition and Russia and China, in an effort to prevent the conflict from escalating further within Europe. The African Union (AU) might focus on maintaining stability within Africa and preventing the conflict from spreading to the continent, by working to keep the various African nations neutral or aligned with the less aggressive faction. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations (ASEAN) could work to maintain regional stability in Southeast Asia, trying to keep the countries in the region neutral or encouraging a dialogue between the warring factions to prevent further escalation. Despite these efforts, the deep divisions within the international community make it difficult to achieve a lasting peace. The conflict between the United States and China continues to escalate, fueled by mutual distrust, economic and political competition, and the desire to protect national interests. As the war drags on, however, the devastating consequences of the conflict become increasingly apparent to the entire world. With millions of lives lost, global infrastructure in ruins, and the international community fractured, the need for a peaceful resolution becomes more urgent than ever. In this context, world leaders finally come together for an emergency summit in Geneva, marking the beginning of the peace negotiations that will eventually lead to the end of World War III. The experience of the war serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of global conflict and the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding in maintaining peace and stability within the international community. Part 3: The involvement of other nations. As the conflict between the United States and China intensifies, the involvement of other nations becomes crucial in shaping the landscape of World War III. With the world divided into factions, various countries are drawn into the conflict, either through alliances or because of their own interests and strategies. 1. India's alliance with the US-led coalition. India, a key player in the Asia-Pacific region, finds itself in a difficult position in the early stages of the conflict. While India and China share a contentious border and historical disputes, India's close ties with the US, both through trade and military cooperation, lead them to align with the US-led coalition. The decision is seen as a strategic move to counterbalance China's growing influence and prevent the spread of the conflict onto Indian soil. India's involvement in the coalition significantly strengthens the US-led efforts, providing a much-needed regional ally with considerable military and strategic capabilities. India's participation also has implications for its relationship with Russia, as India has historically relied on Russian weapons and military equipment. In response, Russia is forced to re-evaluate its relationship with both India and China, as the balance of power in the region shifts. 2. Russia and China's deepening alliance. Russia, fearing the spread of the conflict and the potential for NATO expansion into its sphere of influence, decides to side with China. This move is driven by Russia's concern that the US-led coalition will seek to exploit the chaos of the conflict to make further inroads into their territory and weaken their position on the global stage. The deepening alliance between Russia and China further strains Russia's relationships with European nations, as Russia becomes increasingly aggressive in its support for China. This includes providing military aid, intelligence cooperation, and conducting joint military exercises to demonstrate their unity and shared determination to counter the US-led coalition. 3. Europe's divided loyalties. Europe becomes a complex patchwork of alliances and interests, as countries grapple with the consequences of the escalating conflict. NATO member countries, bound by their commitments to the alliance, find themselves drawn into the conflict on the side of the US-led coalition. However, non-NATO European countries, such as Austria, Switzerland, and Finland, maintain neutrality in order to protect their own interests and avoid becoming embroiled in the conflict. The divided loyalties within Europe create a delicate balance of power, with countries forced to navigate the shifting landscape of alliances and interests. This leads to an increase in regional tensions, as countries scramble to secure their own borders and resources, while also attempting to maintain diplomatic relations with both the US-led coalition and Russia and China. 4. Regional conflicts and the entanglement of smaller nations. As the conflict between the United States and China expands, smaller nations and regional powers find themselves entangled in the broader conflict. In an effort to protect their interests, these countries may be drawn into the conflict through proxy battles, economic pressures, or political allegiances. Countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America may find themselves forced to choose sides in the conflict, as the US-led coalition and Russia and China vie for influence and support. This could manifest in various ways, such as the US-led coalition encouraging the development of pro-democracy movements in countries with authoritarian regimes that are aligned with Russia or China. Russia and China providing military aid and support to regional powers in order to maintain their own influence and counterbalance the US-led coalition. Economic incentives and sanctions being used by the US-led coalition and Russia and China to pressure smaller nations into aligning with their respective blocs. These regional conflicts and entanglements further complicate the global landscape of World War III, as countries are forced to navigate a complex web of alliances, interests, and threats. The consequences of these entanglements can lead to a broader destabilization of the global order, as regional conflicts spill over into other parts of the world, and the already strained international community struggles to maintain stability and promote peace. In conclusion, the escalation of the conflict between the United States and China leads to a rapid reconfiguration of global alliances, and the involvement of various nations in the war effort. The entanglement of smaller nations and regional powers adds another layer of complexity to the conflict, as countries are forced to make difficult decisions in order to protect their own interests and security. Ultimately, the expanding conflict and the growing list of nations involved serve to highlight the devastating impact of the war on the international community and the fragility of the global order. Part 4. The Turning Point. As the global conflict between the United States and China continues to escalate, a turning point finally emerges, offering a glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution. This turning point is the result of a combination of factors, including the devastating consequences of the war, the exhaustion of resources, and the growing realization that the conflict is unsustainable for all parties involved. 1. The devastating consequences of war. As the war rages on for several years, the human, economic, and environmental cost of the conflict becomes increasingly apparent. Millions of people have lost their lives, and countless others have been displaced from their homes, leading to a global humanitarian crisis. The war has also wreaked havoc on global infrastructure, with power plants, communication networks, and transportation systems either destroyed or severely damaged. The economic toll of the conflict is catastrophic, as nations struggle to recover from the disruption of trade, the collapse of industries, and the massive expenditure on military efforts. The war has also led to a sharp increase in global inequality, as the allocation of resources becomes increasingly skewed in favor of the war effort, leaving many struggling to meet their basic needs. The environmental impact of the war is another cause for concern, as the destruction of infrastructure and the disruption of global efforts to combat climate change contribute to further environmental degradation. This, in turn, exacerbates existing issues such as resource scarcity, natural disasters, and population displacement. 2. The exhaustion of resources and the strain on nations. As the war continues, both the United States and China, as well as their respective allies, begin to exhaust their resources and face increasing strain. Military resources, such as personnel and equipment, are depleted, while the economic costs of the war mount, leading to internal pressure to find a resolution and end the conflict. Both superpowers also face growing challenges in terms of public support, as the international community starts to question the continued pursuit of the war. Protests and anti-war movements gain traction, with people demanding an end to the violence and the allocation of resources to rebuilding and recovery efforts instead. 3. The realization that the conflict is unsustainable. The devastating consequences of the war, the exhaustion of resources, and the growing strain on nations begin to create a sense of urgency among world leaders. The escalating conflict is seen as increasingly unsustainable and harmful to all parties involved, prompting a re-evaluation of priorities and a push for peaceful resolution. It is during this turning point that key leaders from both the US-led coalition and Russia and China recognize the need for diplomacy and negotiations in order to bring an end to the devastating conflict. This recognition is a testament to the growing awareness that the war has reached a point of diminishing returns, and that further escalation would only lead to greater suffering and a more precarious global situation. The turning point ultimately sets the stage for the peace negotiations that will take place at the emergency summit in Geneva, marking a crucial step towards ending World War III and rebuilding a stable and peaceful global order. The experience of the turning point serves as a stark reminder of the high cost of conflict and the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding in maintaining peace and stability within the international community. Part 5. The Aftermath and Recovery. As the peace negotiations in Geneva result in a ceasefire and the establishment of a framework for future disarmament and demilitarization, the world begins the long and arduous process of recovery and rebuilding. The aftermath of World War III leaves a profound impact on the global landscape, and the road to recovery is fraught with challenges. However, this period also provides an opportunity for the international community to learn from its mistakes, strengthen global cooperation, and work towards a more peaceful and sustainable future. 1. Rebuilding infrastructure and economies. The first step in the recovery process is the reconstruction of the physical infrastructure that was destroyed or severely damaged during the conflict. This task is monumental, requiring a massive investment of resources, both financial and human, from the affected nations and the international community. As countries work to rebuild their roads, bridges, power plants, and communication networks, they must also address the economic challenges that arise from the war. This includes reviving industries, creating jobs, and addressing mass unemployment. The international community plays a crucial role in this process, providing aid, technical assistance, and expertise to help rebuild and restore economic stability. 2. Addressing social and environmental issues. The aftermath of World War III also demands a focused effort on addressing social and environmental issues that have been exacerbated by the conflict. This includes providing support and resources for those displaced by the war, addressing the mental health needs of veterans and civilians who experience the conflict, and working to remediate environmental damage caused during the war. Furthermore, the recovery period presents an opportunity to refocus global efforts on combating climate change and promoting sustainable development. This may involve investing in renewable energy, implementing more efficient resource management systems, and encouraging international cooperation on environmental issues. 3. Strengthening global cooperation and diplomacy. The experience of World War III underscores the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and dialogue in maintaining global peace and stability. As the world recovers from the conflict, there is a renewed emphasis on strengthening the United Nations and other international institutions in order to prevent future conflicts and better address global challenges. This period also sees a commitment to enhancing global cooperation on a wide range of issues, from trade and development to human rights and security. Through multilateral forums, dialogue, and negotiation, nations work together to forge new partnerships, resolve disputes peacefully, and promote mutual understanding and respect. 4. Promoting education and understanding. A key component of the recovery and rebuilding process is the promotion of education and understanding, both within nations and across borders. Educators and institutions must work to address the gaps in knowledge and understanding that contributed to the conflict, and to promote a culture of peace, tolerance, and mutual respect. This may involve re-evaluating and updating curricula to stress the importance of global citizenship, diplomacy, and empathy, as well as fostering opportunities for exchange programs, cultural events, and other initiatives that encourage cross-cultural understanding and cooperation. In conclusion, the aftermath of World War III is a period of immense challenge and opportunity. As the world recovers from the devastation of the conflict, nations must come together to rebuild infrastructure, revive economies, and address the social and environmental issues that have arisen. In this hypothetical World War III scenario, the situation involving dictators and the Middle East would likely be complex and dynamic. Some key considerations may include: 1. Regional instability. As with any major conflict, a World War III scenario would likely contribute to increased instability in the Middle East and around the world. This could lead to the collapse of governments, an influx of refugees, and the rise of extremist groups seeking to exploit the chaos. 2. Existing conflicts. Ongoing conflicts such as the Syrian civil war, the Yemeni civil war, or tensions between Iran and Israel could be exacerbated by the broader conflict. The escalation of these conflicts could result in further suffering for civilians and regional instability. 3. US and European involvement. The US and European countries may find themselves involved in conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere due to their existing military presence, alliances, and interests. This could lead to a more direct confrontation with dictatorial regimes and potentially draw them into the broader conflict. 4. Changing alliances. As the global balance of power shifts, dictatorial regimes may find their alliances changing or becoming more fragile. This could lead to the collapse of existing regimes or the emergence of new alignments among countries in the region. 5. Human rights and democracy. In the context of a World War III scenario, the promotion and protection of human rights and democracy could become less of a priority for many nations, as they focus on their own security and survival. This could set back efforts to promote democratic values and human rights in the region and around the world. What happens to Taiwan and China? Taiwan's survival. The survival of Taiwan following an invasion by China during or after a World War III scenario is uncertain. Factors that could influence the outcome include the level of international support for Taiwan, the military capabilities of both sides, the readiness and resolve of the Taiwanese population, and the involvement of other global powers. A strong international response, particularly from the US, could deter or hinder Chinese forces, while a weak response might increase the likelihood of a successful invasion. The ultimate fate of Taiwan would be influenced by a range of uncertain variables and strategic decisions. Who will rule China? The question of who will rule China during or after such a conflict is equally uncertain. The current leadership, based on the Communist Party of China, might remain in power if they maintained control over the military and the narrative around the war. However, if the conflict resulted in significant losses or setbacks for China, there could be political instability and a potential power vacuum. In this scenario, different factions within the Chinese government or military might compete for control. The outcome would depend on numerous factors, including the result of the conflict, the internal politics of the Chinese government, and the reactions of the Chinese population. Given the highly speculative and uncertain nature of this discussion, it is important to note that any projections about the future of Taiwan, China, or their relations are limited and should be considered with caution. In a hypothetical World War III scenario, Latin America would likely be affected by the broader conflict and its consequences. However, the specific events and outcomes in the region would depend on numerous factors, including the participants, nature, and scale of the conflict, as well as the foreign policies of the countries involved. Some potential consequences for Latin America could include: 1. Economic disruption. A global conflict could lead to significant disruptions in global trade, capital flows, and commodity prices. Latin American countries that rely heavily on exports or have close economic ties with countries involved in the conflict might experience economic downturns, inflation, or recession. 2. Political instability. The impact of an international conflict could lead to increased political instability in Latin America. This might manifest as changes in government, civil unrest, or the rise of extremist groups seeking to exploit the situation for their own benefit. 3. Migration. As a result of economic difficulties, political instability, or the direct consequences of war, Latin America could see an increase in migration, both within and from the region. This could lead to increased social and political tensions in affected countries and potentially strain relations with countries of destination. 4. Military involvement. Some Latin American countries may choose to align themselves with one of the competing factions in the conflict, either due to historical ties, economic interests, or ideological affinity. This could result in military involvement on their part, either directly or indirectly, and contribute to the broader conflict. 5. Regional cooperation and partnerships. In the face of global upheaval, Latin American countries might seek to strengthen regional cooperation and partnerships to promote stability and address shared challenges. This could lead to increased integration through trade agreements, military alliances, or diplomatic coordination. Africa could be affected by the broader conflict and its consequences in various ways. The specific events and outcomes in Africa would depend on numerous factors, including the participants, nature, and scale of the conflict, as well as the foreign policies of the countries involved. Some potential consequences for Africa could include: economic disruption. As with other regions, Africa could experience economic disruption due to the global consequences of a World War III scenario. Trade routes could be disrupted, commodity prices could fluctuate, and capital flows could be affected, which could negatively impact African economies. Political instability. A global conflict could lead to increased political instability in Africa. This might manifest as changes in government, civil unrest, or the rise of extremist groups seeking to exploit the situation for their own benefit. Some countries may also experience an increase in the activities of non-state actors, such as militias or armed groups, which could further contribute to instability. Migration. Similar to other regions, Africa could see an increase in migration as a result of economic difficulties, political instability, or the direct consequences of war. This could lead to increased social and political tensions in affected countries and potentially strain relations with countries of destination. Military involvement. Some African countries may choose to align themselves with one of the competing factions in the conflict, either due to historical ties, economic interests, or ideological affinity. This could result in military involvement on their part, either directly or indirectly, and contribute to the broader conflict. Humanitarian crisis. A World War III scenario could exacerbate existing challenges in Africa, such as poverty, hunger, and disease, leading to a worsening humanitarian crisis. Disruptions to humanitarian assistance, compounded by the destruction of infrastructure and the displacement of populations, could exacerbate suffering and create additional challenges for aid organizations. Regional cooperation and partnerships. In the face of global upheaval, African countries might seek to strengthen regional cooperation and partnerships to promote stability and address shared challenges. This could lead to increased integration through trade agreements, military alliances, or diplomatic coordination. As we conclude our exploration of this hypothetical scenario, we hope that you found it engaging, informative, and thought-provoking. Your support and feedback mean the world to us, and we invite you to keep the conversation going in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more engaging content like this and brings us one step closer to making the world a more informed and connected place. As a small, independent content creator, we also rely on our viewers' generosity to continue producing high-quality content. If you found value in this video and would like to support our efforts, consider making a small donation by buying us a cup of coffee or becoming a patron through our Patreon page. Your contribution goes a long way in helping us deliver the content you love, and we sincerely appreciate your support. Once again, thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing more captivating videos with you in the future. Stay curious and stay connected.